Have you ever had the unsettling feeling that a moment repeated itself, not exactly the same, but close enough that your body noticed before your mind did? Maybe you were driving at night, stopped at a red light, and for a brief second, it felt like you had already lived that exact pause before. The same glow of headlights, the same stretch of road, the same stillness, not as a memory, but as recognition. You shake it off because there's no language for it, and life keeps moving. But the sensation lingers, quiet and unresolved. What if that discomfort isn't imagination, stress, or coincidence? What if it's the result of how reality is actually processed, not by belief, not by emotion, but by structure? Physics has spent decades uncovering how perception forms, collapses, and fills gaps you never agreed to fill. And once you understand how quantum consciousness interacts with hidden reality, certain experiences stop feeling random and start feeling personal. Not special, not mystical, just precise. The unsettling part is this: most people never notice the mismatch, but some do. And if you felt it, even once, leaving now might mean missing the reason why. If you're still here, it's probably not because you're trying to be convinced of anything. It's because something in you recognized the tension and didn't want it dismissed. In that sense, a like isn't agreement. It's a quiet signal that this moment registered internally, even if you can't yet explain why. And subscribing isn't a promise to follow answers, but a choice to stay with the question as it unfolds. If there's one thought forming right now, let it surface briefly in the comments, starting with a single line like, "I noticed that," and leave it unfinished if you need to. What comes next isn't philosophy or speculation. It's the first place where physics itself began to notice the same fracture, and couldn't ignore it either. What physics encountered next didn't come from intuition or philosophy, but from a controlled experiment that refused to behave. In 1801, Thomas Young conducted what would later become known as the double-slit experiment, initially to test the nature of light. Two narrow openings, a detector screen, predictable outcomes. Except the results weren't predictable at all. When no one attempted to observe which slit the light passed through, the pattern that appeared suggested waves, interference, overlap, probability. But when measurement was introduced, even indirectly, the pattern collapsed into something else entirely, behaving like discrete particles. Decades later, this wasn't dismissed as a flaw. It was repeated, refined, and deepened. In 1982, physicists Marlan Scully and Kai Druhl at the University of New Mexico extended it through what became known as the quantum eraser experiment. The result was even more unsettling. Whether the system behaved like a wave or a particle depended not on physical interference, but on whether information about its path existed at all. The observer effect wasn't metaphorical, it was structural. Reality didn't just respond to interaction, it reorganized itself based on observation within the quantum field. And this means that you are not merely inside reality, moving through a fixed environment. Your perception participates in how outcomes stabilize, how uncertainty resolves, how experience becomes solid enough to feel real. That subtle sense you've had, that things shift when you pay attention, that moments feel different once you notice them, isn't psychological error. It's consciousness expansion, brushing against a system that doesn't finalize itself without input. The unsettling question physics couldn't answer yet was this: if observation changes outcomes, what exactly is doing the observing? And how far does that influence actually reach? What physics explored next didn't involve particles choosing paths, but systems choosing alignment. In the late 1990s, neuroscientists and physicists studying coherence noticed something unexpected while analyzing synchronized states in complex systems. At the Max Planck Institute and later at MIT, research into neural coherence and phase synchronization showed that when separate oscillating systems enter coherence, information transfer becomes dramatically more efficient, even with minimal energy exchange. In parallel, quantum physicists studying field behavior observed similar patterns. Coherent states within a quantum field behave more stably, less noisy, more predictable, not because they are forced, but because their internal variables align. And this explains why certain moments in your life don't arrive gradually but suddenly. The clarity that appears without warning, the silence that drops in your mind when something finally clicks. Indeed, the intuition that doesn't feel emotional but physical, like tension releasing from your chest or a subtle slowing of breath. This isn't mysticism. It's what happens when perception briefly enters coherence with incoming information, reducing internal interference. Physics doesn't claim that consciousness controls reality, but it does show that systems, including biological ones, process reality differently when coherence is present. When noise drops, signal sharpens. When alignment happens, meaning feels immediate. And then the science loops back again, because maintaining coherence requires energy. It demands attention. It isolates you from the comfort of constant distraction. Understanding this doesn't make life easier. It makes perception quieter, sharper, and harder to ignore. And that's where the cost begins to appear. That sharpening comes with a weight most people never talk about. When perception quiets down, the world doesn't suddenly feel clearer in a comforting way. It often feels thinner. Conversations move faster than your thoughts. Familiar routines start to feel oddly scripted. You notice pauses others rush past. This isn't enlightenment or confidence, it's displacement. A subtle sense that you're standing slightly offbeat from the rhythm everyone else seems comfortable following. There's loneliness in that, even when you're surrounded by people. Doubt creeps in too, not about the world, but about yourself. You wonder whether noticing more means losing something simpler, whether paying attention this way makes you harder to understand or harder to belong. There's no dramatic crisis, just a quiet erosion of certainty. You stop reacting automatically, you hesitate before responding, and sometimes you miss the ease of not questioning what felt obvious before. This isn't a flaw or a phase. It's the human cost of perceiving beyond the surface layer most social systems are built around. Physics doesn't warn you about this part, but it's there, woven into the experience. Because once perception changes, it rarely fully resets. And that unresolved tension between seeing more and fitting in less is what leads to the final insight that reframes everything you've felt up to this point. What begins to settle here isn't the idea that you're separate from others, but that you're tuned differently. Not better, not ahead, just more exposed to the structure underneath what most people experience at the surface. The experiments you've heard about didn't reveal a magical universe. They revealed a participatory one, where observation alters outcomes, where coherence sharpens signal, where perception is never neutral. Emotionally, that translated into distance, doubt, and the quiet cost of not fully belonging. Scientifically, it pointed to something even more unsettling. Reality doesn't present itself uniformly to all observers. The sense of being different isn't a defect in character or a failure to adapt. It's what happens when your awareness lingers a fraction longer before collapsing into certainty. Physics shows that systems stabilize only after interaction. Neuroscience shows that coherence reduces noise but demands energy. Put together, they suggest a reality that finalizes itself unevenly, depending on how, when, and where attention lands. And this raises a question that remains unresolved. If consciousness isn't just receiving reality, but participating in how it takes shape, then what happens in the moments before perception locks in? In the space before meaning solidifies? That threshold, before interpretation, before assumption, is where something else operates, quietly and consistently, regardless of whether we name it. You don't need to decide what that means yet, but once you've noticed the delay, the alignment, the cost, it becomes harder to move through the world without sensing what's missing from the usual explanations. And that unfinished space, the one this video can't close, is exactly where the next piece begins. What matters now isn't agreement or certainty, but continuity. If this journey felt complete, you wouldn't still be here at the end of it. The fact that something remains unresolved is the point. Staying connected to this channel isn't about following answers. It's about remaining present as questions deepen and patterns reveal themselves over time. The next step doesn't offer closure, only proximity to something most people turn away from the moment it becomes uncomfortable. The next video is called "Something Happens When You Start Questioning Reality." Physics confirms it, and it begins exactly where this sense of incompletion leaves you. Your consciousness brought you here. What happens now is your choice.